mistakes here because it's 10 years tomorrow since Frederick Valentich disappeared or was taken by a UFO over Bass Strait.
Oh yes, well I remember that is an intriguing story actually.
I don't know we've got much time to discuss about it, but I desperately want to believe in UFOs.
I can tell that.
But the cases that come up are always a bit sus to me. I mean, why doesn't a UFO just land in the city square? Why do they always sort of do funny little things to people in isolated places?
Why indeed? But you'll find out, Paul.
I'll get to the bottom of this one, Doug.
Paul Barber, with you on 3LO from 7:15 until 10 o'clock tonight after the 7 o'clock news service.
Great song, that's the first time I've heard it. It's Ice Cream Days, Jennifer Hall, 3LO, 8 minutes past 9. We're celebrating, I don't think that's quite the right term actually, we're acknowledging this month, in fact tomorrow, the 10th anniversary of the disappearance of Fred Valentich, the disappearance of he and his Cessna over Bass Strait. The disappearance, as we all know, I think, has become one of the great post-war mysteries, what actually happened. There's a solid body of thought, including his family, which is quite convinced that a UFO, an unidentified flying object, was involved in Valentich's disappearance in some way. And as I say, it's 10 years tomorrow since it all happened. So in the studio tonight, I have with me a 70-year-old man by the name of Paul Norman. He will be familiar to those of you who are interested in UFOs. He's made it really his life mission, researching UFO cases around the world. He is obviously a believer in UFOs, and although he does admit that there have been a lot of frauds. He's Vice President of the UFO Research Society here in Victoria. Paul Norman, good evening and thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Now, let's start with the Valentich case because it's 10 years tomorrow. Just let's recap. What do you say happened?
Well, he was on his way to King Island to get crayfish, and soon after he left the lighthouse vicinity at the Cape Otway, he thought he saw an airplane in the area, and he inquired to the traffic controller, who informed him that there was no traffic in the area. But as the object came closer, he saw that it wasn't. He saw that it was a long shape, a metallic appearance, and it had a maneuverability that he couldn't estimate the speed. And he reported his engine coughing or idling, like this electromagnetic effect, which is a characteristic of UFO throughout the world when they're close to ignition systems, radio, TV. And one of his last statements was this strange object was hovering over him and it was not an aircraft. And there was a mystery sound that interrupted the transmission, and after that we don't know what happened. He started to say Melbourne something, and then this sound that's never been explained.
Now, this conversation, of course, with Control was taped. Do you believe we've heard all the tape?
I think we have. The Department of Transport never did release the sound portion of the tape, although they gave the transcript.
Yeah.
And the father listened to the tape to identify his son's voice, whether it was, and he seems to think that it was all there.
Now, you're not just convinced that it was a UFO in his case because of what was said, because you believe that there have been other cases, don't you? Similar, very similar to this.
That's correct. We compared this with other cases. We have a case of a helicopter pilot over Ohio who was describing the same sort of an object that Valentich was describing. Maneuverability, long shape, with a green light that Frederick was describing.
Well, Mr. Norman, you've brought in a tape of some of the conversation. Now, this is between the helicopter pilot and who?
This was the helicopter pilot telling about his experience. Not about him, his experience. It's
him talking about what he saw.
That's right.
All right, let's have him to a couple of minutes of it, and then we'll comment on it afterwards.
Trained military personnel with thousands of hours of flying time behind them. What occurred next might seem like science fiction, but it happened. My last
last looked at my altimeter, we were 1,700 feet. Then this craft began to move slowly to the west, away from us. At this time, I was worried we were going to hit the ground. And I looked at my altimeter, and our helicopter was 3,500 feet, climbing 1,000 feet a minute with no changes in the control. We went from 1,700 feet to 3,500 feet in a matter of seconds and never knew it. The helicopter topped out at 3,800 feet, and there was a bump, like turbulence, at which time we had control of the aircraft again. I had control, and we took it back down to 2,500 feet. And then we continued on to Cleveland. As far as the vehicle itself, there's no doubt in our mind what it looked like. A craft that can move at terrific speeds in excess of 1,000 knots and then stop on a dime. It maintains altitude, can change altitude, climb, descend to encounter a UFO. When it does approach the aircraft, you have no idea what it is. Well, I think if it wanted to collide with us, it could have. But you can't get away from it. You don't have that much time to respond.
All right, now that's some of the description there by the Ohio helicopter pilot, who obviously survived the experience.
A four-man crew. They got back to tell about their experience, and Frederick Valentich did not.
Right. Now, but what is the similarities there between that tape and Valentich?
Well, we have wondered, especially since some of these other cases, like the Knowles car being picked up and all that, was this the sound latching on to the aircraft? And his description with 19 other descriptions, they all seem to harmonize with each other.
Mm. Because you say there are about 20 such cases similar to Frederick Valentich.
Yes, some of them we know they have crashed, and others that just disappeared. We don't know whether went up or down or disintegrated. We know of one's case that actually disintegrated the plane when a UFO was nearby. In fact, it had fired on the UFO.
All right. Now, well, the obvious question to this, and the general sort of question, I suppose, arising out of all these cases, I mean, why do these UFOs only seem to come in sort of isolated cases where someone like Fred Valentich is seemingly on his own, away from other people? I mean, why doesn't a UFO land in the city square here in Melbourne and say, well, here we are? Well,
I'd have to know what the motive is before I could answer that. I don't know the whither, whence, and why, but there have been hundreds of people see them at the time around the cities in those areas, but these strange cases are taking place in isolated areas where they come down on the ground and do these things. We don't know why that is.
Because that's what creates the problem where people say, well, they say, well, I don't believe Paul Norman, I don't believe what Frederick Valentich said. I mean, why can't we just say, well, look, Frederick Valentich, unfortunately, crashed his plane in Bass Strait?
Well, there wasn't anything floating in what he was describing, what the other people had said. There's some theory. One of the theory is that they gradually are revealing their presence, so we won't have a culture shock. That's speculation. I don't know, but we do know that they don't like to be public. These strange cases are taking place in isolated areas.
The UFOs don't like to be too public.
Well, that's just obviously they're not. What their motive would be, I wouldn't know.
Now, you have seen a UFO.
Yes, that's what got me interested back in 1953. I saw an object. I was superintendent of a power station.
Whereabouts was this?
This was in Tennessee.
Right.
And I was called outside to see what it was. I thought it was a nice fine helicopter. It's approaching, coming up the river below the power station, about the speed of a helicopter. And when it got over the station, it stopped for about a half minute, and then it sped away. It was as fast, at least as fast as a jet with no sound.
How big was it? About the size of a helicopter? Or bigger than that?
I'd say it was a circular. It was a circular object. It's just an estimate. I would say it was about 30 feet in diameter.
Did it have lights?
Yes, a whitish blue light, blinking on, off, pulsating about once a second. Change, dim, bright, dim, bright.
And were you scared when this happened?
No, I was awestruck. I was astonished. No, I wasn't scared. In fact, I thought that, well, perhaps the wind is blowing the sound away from me. And when I saw it in November in Tennessee, that's wintertime, of course, I went out and got the tip end of the blades of grass, dry grass, flipped it up, and what a little breeze it was going my way.
And yet there was no sound.
I didn't hear no sound, but people that have been near them, they report a sound similar to a humming transformer and some swishing sound sometime, but they have to be very close to these objects.
No, also, when all this happened to you, I mean, did you say to yourself, oh, look, you know, Paul, don't be stupid, you know, there's some physical explanation of this, there's some sort of funny lighting or star system?
I tried to think of all this, but then I started paying attention to the reports, started interviewing people. The best reports come from airline pilots, daytime sightings, that is, and invariably in the daytime they're dull silver or aluminum color. We think that they possibly have something like a wristwatch, dial on your wristwatch. It doesn't attract the attention until after dark. You don't see this light. However, that is only a theory.
So once this had happened to you, and then you noticed other reports, and you felt, God, there's similarities between what I saw and heard. Now, did you actually report your specific sighting? Did you try and report your case to anybody?
I told the people I worked with, I was telling them about, there were several reports along about that time. And that same month, there was a pilot, two airmen disappeared while they were investigating a UFO case. It happened near Kinross Air Force Base in Michigan. The object was first detected by radar, and they had one interceptor at the base, and they scrambled it. They reported this object, and as they got closer to it, first there was a lot of static on the radio, and then it faded altogether. But the radar, they had the blip of the UFO on the radar and the blip of the interceptor approaching. And when they merged, the two blips merged for about 20 seconds. And then they...
Oops. Yeah, that's right.
Then they took off. They searched the area like Valentich for about 3 weeks, and nothing was ever found. Nothing was ever found. Well, little did I dream back November 1953 that I'd involved in the greatest mystery in Australian aviation history.
And of course you've spent, since that time, 1953, you spent most of your years travelling around the world looking at...
No, I was in the power stations until 1976, doing this part-time.
Right.
But after that, I opted for early retirement to do it this full-time.
It's become an obsession.
Well, some people say compulsion, some obsession, depending on whether my friend or foe.
Because I mean, I'm sure you've been called, you know, a nut and a crank by many people. How do you react to that?
Well, that doesn't bother me. These usually come from people that don't know what's going on. The real little green men are humans who are so green, in fact, they don't realize something's going on that they don't understand. They are the real little green men. As far as green men from outer space, I've been investigating now for 35 years, and I know investigators, personally acquainted investigators all over the world, and I never heard of one case of a little green man. The only little green men I know are humans who so green they don't realize something is going on that they don't understand.
All right, now can we move our attention to the situation, I think it was out in the Nullarbor, the family that came from Perth and were coming to Melbourne by car. This is earlier this year. I think you went out there to have a look at their car, didn't you?
Yes, when it got to Adelaide, we went out and we interviewed the family.
Was it the Knowles family, was it?
The Knowles family.
Yes, that's right.
When they got to Melbourne, and Faye Knowles, who had reached on top with her arm covered with dust.
That's right.
When the time she got to Melbourne, her arm was swelling, and I suspected it was some sort of temporary radiation. But a colleague and I, John Alcatel, we went out to examine the car when it got to Adelaide, and the driver, he thought he was doing 200 Ks to get out from under the object. He didn't realize he was in the air till it dropped back, and he reported 200 Ks, it's speedo full scale. Of course, that car won't go 200 Ks on the ground, but what we did was check up the front wheels when we got out there. It's a front wheel drive, and those wheels will spin at 200 Ks full scale, which tied in precisely as what he said.
So you believe that family?
That was documented by Channel 7.
That's right. Now you believe that family, you believe it was a UFO?
It all ties in, and I took the dust samples that we vacuumed out of the car back to the States with them, and a retired scientist from NASA had submitted it to the Phillips laboratory,
right.
High technology laboratory, and it was not brake dust. And
what was it?
Well, among other things, oxygen, silicon, but the most interesting part was the indication that it could have been astatine. Now, astatine has a half-life when it's first split up, the atomic elements. For example, it was first synthetically produced in California University by bombarding bismuth with helium nuclide. And when that action takes place, it's slightly radioactive, but it has a half-life of 7 or 8 hours. And by the time they had got to Sedona, and where it was checked by the police for radiation, naturally it had been decayed. But I've recently found, after I went back there, I found another gentleman who went to that area about an hour after it happened, and picked up a sort of fiber stuff on it, about a quarter of a mile it spread it along the highway. And between his fingers it crumbled in something that resembled, well, some sort of graphite, but
right.
It was so light the wind was blowing it away. And 1 week later, it's important, he broke out the same symptoms as Fay Knowles, only he was admitted to the hospital a few days later. And we're trying to now to get the two doctors together with his permission to try to determine if this is what happened.
Well, it's a strange case. So is Frederick Valentich. Well, the whole thing is just fascinating. I just wish we just knew a little bit more, but that's what you've dedicated the rest of your life to finding out more about UFOs. Now, you're interested in people getting in touch with you, want to either talk to you about various things that they might have seen, ask you whether in fact they may have seen UFOs, or in fact join your society. So your box number is, if people want to contact you, P.O. Box 43, that's right, is it?
What is that?
Moorabbin 3189. All right.
And we will keep their names confidential if they so desire.
All right, so if they've got any queries about it, or if they want to belong to the society, or if they've had an experience which they feel you should know something about. Well, how will you, well, tomorrow is not really celebration day, is it? How will you spend tomorrow?
On the telephone, talking to other people, and we've got calls coming in pretty often now where I am about the case, asking questions about it.
10 years tomorrow since Frederick Valentich disappeared. All right, Paul Norman, thank you very much indeed for coming in tonight.
My pleasure, thank you.